Hey, everybody. Welcome to In the Room with Communitas North America. And this is just every other Tuesday night we get together. We talk about some of the things that are important to us in Communitas North America and kind of welcome you in to our world to just see how we look at church and how we look at doing mission together and talk about ways, hopefully help spark a conversation about missional church planting and missional living, and how this can affect our culture and our communities. And we're back. We won't do a long introduction of our guest because now we've had him back 3 times. We have Mike Kuder here. We're going to talk about the last 2 of the 6 dynamics that we focus on in the dynamic adventure. We had scheduled Bethany LeBou as well, but she had a schedule conflict, so she's not able to make it today. James is here with us too. And it's going to be fun. We're going back to me being one of the questioners instead of the one being asked the questions. So this will be good. But, we got to start out, we typically give people a chance to tell a little bit of their story. Mike's shared some of his story already, but people may not know. Well, they might guess it since he's from Jersey, but he's a Yankee fan. So we might have to talk a little bit about Aaron Judge today, just to start out. He's got the logo out.
Exactly.
It was good to see. I told Mike before the show, I would personally say Aaron Judge now has the record for home runs because the ones above him, they had a little extra help, and I just don't count that. So, but
absolutely,
as far as we know, Aaron's done it without help, and that's a good thing. All right,
yes,
we'll get going. And
looking for 62 tonight, right?
What?
Right now, actually, we're looking for 62 tonight.
Looking for 62 tonight. Yeah. When he hit 61, we'll side note here. I was like going, okay, 7 games left, 2 a night for the next 7 weeks.
Exactly.
We don't even have to worry about
75, 76, exactly.
Have him do it straight up. So,
alas, it was not to be.
But yes. But anyway, we're going to talk about Hub and Extend tonight.
Yeah.
And go ahead, go for it, James.
Yeah, just to get us started. Mike, we talk about Hub and Extend together a lot in Communitas, like the chapter in Dynamic Adventure. I think it's just one chapter in their group together. Could you kind of describe some of the distinctions between the dynamic of Hub and the dynamic of Extend?
Sure. Well, first of all, they're both about the impetus for multiplication and expansion, primarily of the kingdom of God, the rule and reign of God on earth, but through the local church. And mostly what it comes down to, although not completely, is a matter of the proximity of where that's happening. So hubbing, it tends to be thought, or we tend to think of it as a more local kind of an experience, and extending tends to be thought of as outside of our immediate surroundings, at least, perhaps a different city in our country or state or whatever, or classic sort of missionary sending, to far corners of the earth. That's a lot of what it means. It's about, again, that locale. But also hubbing has this sort of feel to it about the center of a bicycle wheel, the hub of the hub and spokes and so on, and that tends to be more local. We tend to think of that more locally, and that's about partnership and collaboration. We really want to be catalytic in our city or in our neighborhood, in our general area, to find partners and collaborators to do kingdom work together. It's not just necessarily all about our particular faith community or a very small group of people starting another mission. It's about what are the needs of our city, for example, and how is the gospel best presented in light of those needs. And then who do we know that we can collaborate and partner with within our city to meet those needs and again, to demonstrate, proclaim the gospel, sort of advance the kingdom, if you will, locally. there's more of a feel of that. So local networks being part of other organizations. But I don't want to dismiss that that's also part of extending as well, and is a good thing. Just it might be somewhat easier in a local context, and they're often we can discover the resources more easily, and potentially have greater impact in our city that way.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So hubbing the practice is much more local, and the practice of extending, it's similar, but it's happening like outside of one city, more on a international scale. Is that?
Yes, I mean I would say that that's fair,
Okay.
largely. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Mm-hmm. I mean, and hubbing, for example, you think about it like a micro church network within a city. Like they should all ideally they're all interconnected in some way. Again, sort of forming that hub and spoke kind of a paradigm. And that doesn't necessarily have to take up a lot of space in a city, but it hopefully it's connected well and collaborative. And that's a little bit different of a feel from extending as far as where I'm seeing it from, where my perspective is.
Yeah.
But ideally, maybe not to get too far ahead of us, ideally we'll be looking for collaborators in a completely different locale as well if we're extending. And then hopefully, be part of a hubbing affair there as well, and participate in that there.
Okay. How are these practices different than more prevalent language might be like church planting?
Mm-hmm.
So how is hubbing extending distinct from that, or is it the same?
I don't know that it's necessarily distinct from it, but there is a huge emphasis on collaboration and partnership on either accounts, hubbing and extending. Yeah, and we just find that really, really important to know who's in the neighborhood, to know well the neighborhood, by our embedding and initiating and all of the things that we talked about in previous weeks and that are in the guide, as we really get and immerse into the context even further, or we're part of it already, or whatever that may be. Knowing what the unmet needs are, knowing what opportunities to serve people well, love people well, in Jesus' name. Again, initiate well and share the gospel wisely and well through word and deed. We want to have partners in that. We want to have collaborators. We want to find our role in the kingdom life of a city. It may be this thing because everybody else is doing this stuff. And our group of folks are really passionate about a certain segment of the population or a certain need, and that's not being met by potential collaborators or something. So we might be filling a gap. We also may be just adding strength to the citywide effort. I'm having a hard time because my wife is watching the Yankee game and screaming upstairs. So it's something is happening at 8:08 p.m. So anyway, it's hard to full disclosure. But a lot of times in church planting literature, and again, this is God uses everything, for His glory in our efforts, and I don't want to besmirch anyone or anything, but there's a lot of talk in the church planting word about doing your research, obviously, in a new neighborhood, and stories of churches that have gone door to door and found out what the needs are, and all these different sort of things. That's great, right? The partnership and collaboration aspect is different than that. It's true. It's getting to know who is in the neighborhood working and trying to really collaborate well with them. Not so much extending a brand as it is extending, the kingdom, and surely not trying to scope out the competition, quote unquote. And I say that, gently, but we're really truly looking for collaborators in the work that we're doing. Networking, partnership. We're just all about that ultimately. And again, I didn't mention it. I should. We're really about trying to find out where God is at work in a particular city or in a specific street or locale, and join him there in what he's doing, and fulfill the call that he may have on us in our life for that, in our corporate life. Does that answer the question, kind of?
Yeah, it does. It sounds, listening to you, it sounds like there are some specifics that make these dynamics distinct, particularly that there's a strong desire to collaborate with the work that's already being done, and like a coming alongside of, rather than like just entering like lone wolf or whatever you might say. I think is really beautiful and meaningful to like seek out partnership. And it's like the initiate dynamic where you're like looking for expressions of God's goodness that already exist, and joining along with
Absolutely. We've had some experience with that in a Communitas, especially when we talk about our international church planting efforts and so on. It's a little different than North America per se, because oftentimes we're meeting people who have already sort of embedded, or they're just planting a church in their hometown in Iowa or something. If we're sending, in which we do send people to a different city, to initiate a project, it's a little, it has nuances that are different. And I've been on several research trips where we've gone, for example, to Athens, Greece, and spent a week there as a preliminary research trip. And our absolute objective was what's happening in this city in terms of vibrant expressions of Christian faith, and who are the folks, what are they doing, what do they need, what are the needs that they would have us meet were we to come and work alongside them. We just got to know them really well. It's a very small community, basically, but certainly in comparison to the metropolis of 6 million, I'll have 50,000 evangelical Christians is a pretty small number, for example. And there are not that many churches on the radar, and they were just amazed at our attitude coming in like that and saying, how can we help you? What needs to be done here that we can assist with? They said that no one does that. It's more of a lone wolf thing, and typically things are not all that fruitful or successful because they're just not embraced by the community, and they kind of cut off that potential support and mutual care and all the things that would go along with that, and rather more of a competitive thing. And it's just like, it's just grievous, honestly. That said, that community of evangelical folks in that city, there are people from all walks of faith, and their city to city is there, and there's a whole bunch of other networks and Operation Mobilization and Baptists, and they all are relatively friendly and certainly have an eye toward collaboration. And so it was just an absolutely beautiful thing to experience that, but also to have the response of, wow, no one comes in here and says that kind of stuff. They just want to point out what we're doing wrong and how they're going to do it better if they even talk to us, And so that's a big difference. And I think it's a beautiful kingdom difference that I'm just really fond of.
Yeah, that is. It's just, it is a contrast to the way many people look at, particularly in North America, church planting, starting new things. There can be a bit of that competitiveness if we're not careful.
Exactly. You have to be really, really, really careful about that, and continue to check motivations, and
Yeah.
continue to keep a posture of humbleness, humility, and understand that we're serving a Lord who's in charge, and kingdom divided against itself won't stand, and
Hmm.
all that kind of stuff. And I think we're called to love one another well, regardless of potential theological differences and so on.
Yeah. That's,
Yeah, for
that's
sure.
good. That's good. Well, as missional faith communities kind of start moving towards this hub and extend,
Hmm.
how do they discern their focus well?
I think there's uh, two primary things involved there, and the first one is that teams um, need to be deeply embedded and embedded well in their neighborhoods. If you're not aware of what's happening in your neighborhood or your city, if you want to expand it a little bit, um, you're not going to know what the next thing is. You're going to think up a plan and you're going to try and execute it and so on, and you may not be fruitful in that. But to know the needs of the community, um, people who where to plant the seeds might be an easy way to say it. Alongside, meeting needs. I mean, we're about demonstration and declaration at Communitas. We really believe loving people holistically is important. So I can't separate those two things. Um, so that's the first thing. Just being deeply and well embedded is the first thing.
Hmm.
Uh, that would be like one. 1A would be that members of the given faith community would be empowered and operating in their gifting. And yeah, that what they're experiencing out in the world or in their daily lives or in their block or wherever that context is for them would be carefully and seriously considered by whatever leadership structures exist in terms of the way they're thinking about the next thing they want to do, or extending or hubbing, or especially obviously. um, that makes all the difference, in my experience and in my opinion. When that happens, I think you've automatically got a kind of an energized set of folks who are passionate about certain things. You don't have to browbeat people into serving somewhere or whatever the case may be. If the initiative just doesn't come from on high and then like, okay, now we need people to do our program.
Hmm.
And there's place for that sometimes too. I'm not besmirching that completely, but if you not completely, I'm not besmirching that. But if you, I'm not dissing it too much.
Just a little.
Again, the empowered folks who are operating in their gifting, isn't that what we want in terms of making disciples, right? Of all of our folks, and what they see and hear and taste and feel and all that, out in their world is really important. It's important clues, right, to the
Hmm.
discerning process as to what's going on. Um, so that makes a huge difference. Also, tapping around and seeing who's connected to whom. Like, oh, this person over here, that they work in this after school program, blah blah blah. I bet you didn't even know that. Yeah, but Mary does that, and it's awesome. And oh, there's things we can do there.
Yeah.
Um, let's be uh, receptive to those things, and listen to those things. And the other thing is, point two then would be we truly have to learn to discern. I'm sort of defining a word with its definition, with the
Yeah.
word, but um, as I have sort of worked through this dynamic adventure project, and one of the things that was kind of more foreign to me than most things was this whole discernment process piece. And
Mhm.
I've gained a really significant appreciation for this whole communal individual and then communal discernment process. And in my life, it doesn't come naturally, to do that, to listen well to the Spirit, to listen well to my friends, in the faith community, to listen well to the neighborhood, uh, and to have quality. That's more individual, but then to do that in a community of folks and listen well to each other and discern what the Spirit is leading us toward, that is absolutely an acquired skill for a group of people. And that's why we spend so much time talking about that in dynamic adventure. I just feel that those two things are just really, really important. And if you can do those two things well, then there's next steps. But you ask, how does that start? What are important things? Those are the important things, in my opinion.
Right. And I appreciate that. I think that's, you really do hit on a lot of key things. You gave without dissing too much, but I've seen the example where it's like, we're just taking our model from the suburbs and we're transplanting it into the inner city, and
right.
Hey, do our program. And the frustration I've seen in people is hard to watch sometimes. And that, and I think, as from our own experience in Indianapolis, not really a formal hubbing thing, but yet we tended to extend or hub when a group of our people who all worked at the same place, all had developmental disabilities, things like that, began to connect with their coworkers in the same company, and they start to create their own little community, and they started doing, kind of imitating some of the stuff we were doing, in Diakonos. I go, that's how it should be, organic and natural.
Yeah.
So
I would agree. And I think another thing to remember in it is it doesn't have to be our brand. It doesn't have to carry our flag. Exactly. We keep our focus on the expansion of the kingdom. Living out the kingdom in front of people and letting it unfold, letting God's rule and reign in a place unfold, and sort of alerting people that's God over there. Like that's God at work over there. Just doing that, I think, can relieve us of so much of the pressure of this has to succeed with this flag in it, and I just feel that, and again, it all kind of fits in obviously with the ethos of the rest of dynamic adventure and the kind of faith communities that we're trying to be about in Communitas, which is, very authentic, transparent, relational communities. And it would seem to be the next piece of that, right? Is to allow people to do their thing in authentic and transparent and good ways, and respect what they bring back with them, and say, how do we empower that? Because it's not about this church in my living room or in this building. It's about the kingdom, and discipling, and introducing folks to Jesus, inviting them Jesus' way, and then discipling them, and so on. It's not. It's about the kingdom. It's not about necessarily a brand or a specific project or whatever the case may be.
Right.
Yeah. Yep.
We could probably designate a conversation to how we're able to do collaboration well in Communitas. And I really think the thing it would come down to is the kingdom's the most important thing. I've secondhand a lot through my dad have seen Communitas really work with a wide diversity of people and equipping them and just supporting them, which is really awesome, and a thing that I'm very proud of in Communitas North America.
Agree. To remind you fellas, kingdom seeking is our one of our primary values, and we're about where is God at work, and who are those folks, and so on and so forth, and respecting that, and blessing it and participating in it and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, check out the Communitas North America Statement of Values and you get it all.
Plug.
We should put a link in for that. Just if I could real quick highlight some of the things I heard you say. One of the things I think is worth mentioning, I think you said in our first episode on our 6 dynamics, you talked about how like that we don't view the dynamics as being linear necessarily. It's not like you embed and then once you're done embedding, you just don't think about that anymore. And in your response to how do we discern how to hub and extend, or if we're being invited to hub and extend, was we should be embedding. We should be familiar with the neighborhoods around us. And so I just wanted to highlight that. I thought that was cool. It's cool to see the thing you said however many episodes ago.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And none of, they're all, again, it's this nonlinear, it's the Celtic knot, and can be messy and, and so on. But all these, it's kind of like I'd like to say it's a dashboard, but it's not really a dashboard either, but it's just being aware, having these things in view. Maybe at times they're straight in front of you, but hopefully if you just turn a little bit left or right, you see the other dynamics too, and you're mindful of them,
Mm-hmm. The other things I heard that I thought were really cool. One, there's such a responsibility to equip people well if we're going to be doing hubbing and extending. So part of this is just building up the people in our community to be able to express their passions around these things and their convictions around these things, and giving them the tools they need to just be like, hey, you're free to go hub. And and the last thing, I hope this doesn't make people feel uncomfortable, because I think some people don't think of themselves as creatives, but people are creative. It's just part of our identity. Creativity is, I think, so much a piece of what we talk about when we talk about starting new projects, embedding, initiating. It's just like we become a part of communities and start thinking about like, where are the needs here? What would it look like to bring the kingdom further into this space? I just heard that, and that's always the thing that excites me.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and why would you not want to enlist that creativity in everyone? I mean, it's just, and what you've just kind of talked about is just also a different kind of discipleship, right? As you say, we want to bring people to maturity, but what does that mean? That they know a lot, or that they're, again, discerning people, they're people of action, that yes, they know a lot, they love scripture, they love the text, they love the story of God and and his interaction with the world and all that, but it's just a slightly different way of thinking about even discipleship. That's an engaged, active discipleship. It's not afraid to go out and kind of get your hands dirty and experiment with things and fail and, blah, 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 or take risks. A lot of times things are risk averse, but we could fail. We could try something and fail, and that's okay. And that's a growing and learning experience, in the discipleship process, right? I mean, look at the Gospels and all the things, like, again, I just feel like all that's a discipleship thing. The other thing people need, that I think we may have referred to it in a previous session, but I mean, don't underestimate the need that people seem to have permission to do stuff. I've just had experience after experience where people just have expressed like, well, they've expressed their desires and their dreams, and there's even a sense of calling that they have. And when you ask them, like, well, what's preventing you from that? And they just don't really know. But ultimately, like, I don't think I have permission to do that. Like, who are you looking for permission from? Like, and I'm not advocating for complete and total anarchy, but like, us as leaders, we can't be the gatekeepers to everything. Let's have an empowered group of folks. And again, that's a nuance to discipleship we have to pay attention to. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think this is good. I think it helps to really envision this in terms of discipleship, because really discipleship is multiplication of the kingdom in a lot of ways. And
Absolutely.
um, the question becomes when, maybe, like,
Mm-hmm.
when should a faith community begin, you know, considering whether it's time to hub and extend? I mean, do you wait till you have 100 members, or do you, yeah?
Yeah. I think you know the answer. What my answer is going to
I know. I'm kind of throwing out
be, and I'll just
the
take it
straw
and
man
just.
there. Staring it out.
Excuse me. Excuse me. I mean, in a lot of our trainings, we talk about beginning with the end in mind.
Yeah.
And I think trainings, discipleship, all of the kind of common discourse that we have together needs to be about the kingdom, right? And the expanding kingdom of God, of which we're being, of which we are part and we're maturing in and inviting people toward. So again, I just don't think it's a linear thing. I think we need to be aware of it. Again, it's sort of that maybe the heads up display where if I look a little bit to the left and the right, I see, okay, there's some possibilities to hub right that we're focused on practice, but that's a hubbing opportunity right there, and maybe I should just divert my attention a little bit and see how that would play out or something. I don't think it's very easy to be theoretical about this. Okay. And I know the hands-on, like, yeah, but I mean, we got people that are just doing this and doing that. And this guy's in and out of jail, or this is like, how am I going to, I get that.
Yeah.
Um, I think we just need to be open to the opportunities that God presents whenever they may come. Um, I don't think any of these dynamics, much less hubbing and extending, are either or situations. Either we do this or we do that. There might be we're mostly doing this and we have some time for that, or so and so met a great partner and we're going to release them to take a peek over there and come back and talk to us about it, or something. Like, I don't think you need to be so compartmentalized in it. Again, because we're attempting to follow the Spirit where it's leading. And
Right.
so no one knows where the wind blows. Jesus told us that, So I think that's my primary answer. But it also, well, and if you think about it, like even just the smallest potential faith community, a handful of folks or whatever. I mean, why would we preclude the possibility that one or more of our members wouldn't get a sense from God that they ought to be a missionary somewhere, and then why wouldn't we support them? Like, nope, sorry, we're not ready for that. We're like, okay, there may be financial constraints and there's some reality involved, but but seriously, like, okay,
Yeah.
so we're not going to be able to like pay your full salary to go to Argentina or whatever, but we can help you, we can encourage you, we can pray for you, we can connect you with other folks, we can help you do this and do that. And why would we not do that? I mean, that just seems incredibly limiting, again, because it's about the kingdom, and,
Right.
and it moving out, and we can't predict where the Spirit's going to move and in whom the Spirit's going to move and in what way the Spirit's going to move. But I think we ought to be ready. We were talking, Leon, a week or two ago about this whole idea of multiplication within Communitas, and one of the things I was saying is, like, it's been described, I guess, by Len Sweet and others, talking about numinauts, being people who are exploring it through the Spirit. Like, and I have this metaphor of, let's have our sails up in case the wind blows, and see where it takes us. I feel like that's just a good metaphor for a lot of this, especially the hubbing and extending, because it can feel at times surely like a lot of pressure, like, you know, we gotta do something, and we gotta multiply, we gotta plant another church, we gotta do this, we gotta do that. And that may or may not be valid, but I think the idea of trying to keep the sails trimmed and up and trimmed, you know, and seeing where we can catch the wind, it seems like a good strategy to me.
It's good.
And part of that, if I could, part of that I think is leadership, particularly making sure, and it's a little graph, and a little section in Dynamic Adventure, but you know, the typical life cycle of a church plant is that, you know, it sort of starts with the apostolic folk, and, you know, the people that are entrepreneurial, they want to get stuff going. And again, not a diss, but just what happens most of the time. Then the pastor teachers sort of take over at some level, and, you know, things tend to be more inward focused than outward focused at a certain life cycle. We would advocate for trying to have a balanced leadership, where all the giftings, you know, in Ephesians 4 are at work, and in some ways, as much trouble as they might cause and as much craziness as they may, you know, keeping apostolic folks activated and out there, and listen to, I mean, the apes, the apostles, prophets, and evangelists. Really leaning into what they have to say to our leadership community just seems to me to make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
If anyone's curious, just to like give some context to Mike's reference, he's referencing Ephesians 4 when that's Paul, right? Yeah.
It is.
Paul is telling the church that members have been equipped as apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, and teachers for the benefit of the saints, is what it says, but for the benefit of the kingdom, the benefit of the church. That idea, we talk about APEST, apostle, prophet, evangelist, shepherd, teachers, very central to how we view the church within Communitas.
Yes, and to put a finer point on it, perhaps leadership within the church, and making sure those giftings are represented well in a leadership community, ideally, and literally of a community of people, of like a few people, not necessarily just one who has them all, you know, but so that we have these different voices speaking into our discerning process about this, that, and then we have some exercises about, you know, this situation happens, you know, where are all the apostles? Like, how do you respond? You know, how do the shepherds respond to that? Oh, I just want to hug them, you know, like, or whatever. But it's really interesting because there are differences in perspective and then response, like, to different situations based on, you know, that gifting matrix. And so having those people, again, speaking into leadership, it's just a very beneficial thing. It can be crazy making because you can be pulled in 5 different directions, and you ultimately have to wrestle it to the ground and make some decisions and stuff. But to be without those voices, I think, is to our detriment.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah.
There's very much a reliance on the community when we're talking about like timing of like when it's time to hub and extend. We're looking at the faith community and seeing who has passions and a sense of direction. And so you talked about having the sails up, and I think you're making sure that that people are equipped so that they're hearing if God's saying, "Hey, I'm calling you to like build relationships in this neighborhood, in this restaurant, like whatever the space may be." And then, like you said, just having a willingness to like send people when they're feeling that direction.
Send, or at minimum release.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, that's kind of the paradigm change, you know, that we started talking about a really long time ago, you know, just again, the church in the community and of the community and with the community versus some space where it gathers and so on. And those are oversimplifications, but you know what I'm saying.
Well, to wrap up our conversation, Mike, are there any stories you would like to share within Communitas of our faith communities hubbing or extending that might just...
Sure. And at the same time, so, hubbing and extending are, I think, just by definition, sort of aspirational. Like, we aspire to do it. And sometimes we're successful, sometimes we're not, right? In Communitas, would we like to do it more than maybe we have? Probably yes. And I don't think there's anything wrong with being aspirational in this particular goal. But nonetheless, there are plenty of stories. And the first story is that a lot of church plants, Communitas or otherwise, are of themselves hubs or extensions of other existing works. So whether it's a group of people who together feel called to plant a church in a new city that's supported by their home church, that's in some ways an extension, right? Again, it's kind of that Celtic knot piece, if you really want to think about it that way, And so, but more specifically, there's a story in Dynamic Adventure about New Community Church in Spokane and their trials and travails about the hubbing, especially, and planting out. It's a really good story. There's a bit of pain involved, but and at the end of the day, though, I mean, it was a fairly well established, fairly large church. One of our former presidents was the lead pastor there, actually, Rob, and he ultimately felt, I guess you could say, convicted that he needed to be developing leaders who could be church planters at some level, and then give them the opportunities. And some of them were kind of like, it's a little cringeworthy, but it's like, okay, well, I'm going to fire you in a year because you're going to have another church by that point. Like that's the goal, like, or whatever. But also seeding, internships and apprenticeships and different things like that, where people could kind of get involved in it. And that, frankly, is where Jeff, our current president, kind of came from as a result, with a small church in Idaho, meets in his home. So that's one, and then you can read about that in Dynamic Adventure. But we have a church in the UK, in Scotland, more specifically, that was a bit of a collaborative plant with Communitas, and they were fledgling church and so on and so forth through growing cycle. One of the women there, I guess, was a student, met an international French student, relationship developed, all that. They, got married and sensed together that they were being called to his native France to start a new work. And the church loved them and supported them in that, and still does. And there's still lots and lots of back and forth. So a whole new work on a practically a whole, entirely different context, started as a result of that. Again, out of the same church, a group of folks that were, again, equipped and empowered to poke around and find needs in the community and so on, found a lot of people of Persian descent in their city seeking asylum and other things like that. Many of which is a very curious process how that works. So, I'll spare you the details, but suffice to say, a lot of those folks that were seeking asylum wound up in homeless shelters with very, very little to do, and so on and so forth. And also very few prospects, very, very little to be motivated in life about. And so anyway, these folks from this church went to serve with them long term. And that birthed an entire Farsi speaking Persian church, like out of it, like of hundreds of people. um, and to the point where it's my understanding that outreach ministry that turned into a church like dwarfed the sending church, right? So they were having issues about how that all works, and like governance and all that, and through some travail they decided, okay, so we're just going to birth you guys as a new church in our city, all right, and we don't want to hold you back, etc., etc. And so they've continued to thrive, continue to flourish, both really. And now just recently we've just had some news that Farsi speaking church is now partnering with other networks in that local city. And they're collaborating now and looking for ways where something like 18 or 19 folks are participating in this roundtable, each one of whom senses a call to plant a new work as a result. And
Wow.
that's hubbing, that's extending, that's amazing. That's a whole lot of stuff. But it's certainly God at work. And so it's just being open-handed, open-minded to those opportunities, and trying to treat each other with grace, obviously, if we, in spite of some disagreements and different things like that. But yeah, anyway, so that's a really good, beautiful multiplication story. James, you should tell the story of Amy and Ishmael.
I actually think my dad's coming next week, and we're gonna get into that one.
Okay, but suffice to say, small house church meeting in
Meeting in
hottest part of
California.
Bakersfield, California, and in the home, doing its thing. But anyway, long story short, someone felt a call of God, right, to do ministry in Ecuador, and that little living room church, sent out and supports and blesses, and dad's going there next weekend, to be with those guys and taking a team there. And to me, one of the most amazing parts of that whole thing is because it's a house church and low overhead, and we're not paying for a building. Like, they are so able to unbelievably bless those guys in Ecuador, and like pay for heart surgeries and all kinds of stuff. Like, that's just nuts, right?
Yeah.
Because everybody's kind of serious about tithing and blah blah blah, and pretty serious about discipleship. And
Amy and
really,
Ismail's story with Communitas demonstrates so many of our dynamics very beautifully. I'm really excited to just have a big conversation about that, because that story is awesome.
It's amazing, and that's kind of what we've been talking about, right? It's empowering people and saying, hey, if you're here in the spirit, we want to listen with you, right? And how can we support that, and so on. It's great. There are other stories too. I mean, so much of the work that Communitas does in the Netherlands is the result of one church plant that has, different other projects that they've birthed, and they in turn have birthed other things. And there's so much. Also, I don't think we should overlook. I mean, first we got to say it's God's work and we're following him. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But the other piece of it is, are we intentional about that? If you're intentionally looking for opportunities, intentionally listening to each other, to God, intentionally willing to take some risks when you feel those movements, to respond favorably, or obediently, maybe is a better word. I think that's where it begins to happen, right? I mean, it's the intentionality piece that you say, okay, we're sensing this. You're sensing this call to Ecuador. We're going to support you. Right? Rather than dithering or, oh, you sure? What about your what about your career? Oh, go for it. It's cool.
Yeah.
So I'm preaching now. Sorry.
Oh no, this is good stuff. This is good. And it is. I mean, these are some good stories you shared, and that will kind of prime the pump for next week a little bit, because we will have Brent, James' dad, talking about specifically how their community extended into Ecuador. And yeah, the fun part is he'll be with us in Denver this weekend, and then he's headed down to Ecuador, spend some time with Amy and Ishmael, and then he'll be like right off the plane coming back next
Oh,
Tuesday.
okay.
So, fortunately, time zones are pretty similar, so it won't be too bad for him.
That's true.
But anyway, so hey, thanks, Mike, for joining us and really just kind of getting us to think about the hub and extend part of what Communitas does. Thank you for joining when you had the distraction going on in the other room. And yes, that was number 62 that you're.
Oh, all right.
I looked it up on.
Okay, I was disciplined to not do that. I just want to let you know.
There you go. I had to look. I put it in the comments, so we have it recorded.
Okay, nice.
In the Communitas North America archive. Anyway, so thanks for joining us again. And
my pleasure.
We will be back in 2 weeks talking with Brent Cola about just practically how they their community in Bakersfield lived out this whole hub and extend, particularly the extend part in sending one of their couples to Ecuador. So everybody have a good couple of weeks, and thanks again for watching.
See you in Denver, boys.
Hey, yeah, see you in Denver.